Now you may want to know, what's this got to do with cognitive radio? This young lady in this picture is Audrey Hepburn, and she starred in this famous movie, Wait Until Dark. I don't know how many people remember seeing this movie. I saw it some 30 years ago. It is a very good movie. This young lady is blind, and she lives in a small flat, and I think I can't be sure that I remember the story correctly. The flat is broken in by a person who's stalking her, and he's about to kill her. She's blind. She goes around the flat and smashes all the light bulbs. The presence of light has no impact on her. The presence of light has, the absence of light has severe impact on this person who's wanting to kill her. As a result, she manages to outgun this person, and she saves herself. So the story is good. Please watch it yourself. So how does the interference impact radio systems? This is why I wanted to show you the example of the presence or absence of light. If your neighbor puts a 100-watt stereo amplifier through the window, and you live next door, but you are deaf, then it isn't going to have any impact on you at all. On the other hand, if you are very sensitive, and if the neighbor's house is very well soundproofed as well, etc., you still are going to be annoyed by that. So the impact of interference is very much dependent on the application. So here we have two applications. We have point-to-point radio systems. They have very robust fade margins, and they have much stronger ability to withstand interference as compared to cellular radio, which is designed right out to the cell edge where signal conditions are weak. It has got to put up with interference from other cells. It's got to put up with a weak signal from its own source. It has got to put up with interference from within the same cell, because we now use spread spectrum systems, so they all use the same frequency, and it's got to cope with shadow fading margins. So its ability to withstand any interference, therefore, is very, very low. It's a guy with the soundproofed house, and the guy next door is very sensitive. So CRs should therefore not be introduced in cellular networks. Well, just to show you some meaning behind this, here we have a link budget. So Finan spoke earlier on and said that if we have a small degradation in the signal to noise ratio at the link budget, and how many CRs we can accommodate. I will show you another slide from the same talk which we both prepared. But here, if you just have a 1 dB loss in the link budget, so if you follow D to the 2 or D to the 3 or D to the 4 propagation, there is quite an impact on the coverage area. And in the case of cellular radio systems which use especially spread spectrum technology, we particularly design these radio systems with overlapping coverage areas, so that when you are at the cell edge, you are talking to a number of base stations concurrently, and therefore there is a soft handoff gain which we factor into the link budget. If you reduce the overlapping coverage areas, there's a double impact. First of all, you've reduced the overlapping coverage area, you've also reduced the soft handoff gain. So now just going on to somewhat more issues. There was a question as to how cognitive radios will be accommodated in the radio regulations. So from an information theory point of view, there are these three paradigms. Not so sure whether these will all can be implemented in the radio regulations, but there is this underlay approach where the cognitive radio channel knows the channel state information to the primary. So the interference part from the cognitive radio to the primary, the signal strength and the channel information. This is called the channel state information. That is known to the cognitive radio, and the cognitive radio transmits simultaneously as long as it causes some small acceptable interference. And the transmit power of the cognitive radio is limited by whatever the interference constraint the primary may impose. So that's the underlay approach. I think this is the kind of the primary, secondary approach which we currently have in the radio regulations. We are familiar with this. This probably can be accommodated in the radio regulation. Next one is a difficult one, the overlay approach. The cognitive radio knows the channel state information, but also knows the code books and the messages of the primary. Imagine all these privacy informations which will result as a consequence of that. The primary messages, code books, etc. must all be given to the cognitive radio. It's very hard in practice to do, but information theorists do things in an academic environment, not necessarily worrying about whether they can be implemented in practice or not. But the cognitive radio transmits simultaneously with the primary, not worrying about causing a small amount of interference, but says to the primary, I'll relay part of your message to your receiver. As a result, you will find that there is no loss of performance to you. That's the kind of payoff the cognitive radio gives. And it can transmit at any power. So these are completely different sort of ways of doing things. And the third one is this interweave approach. And that is the one which is being talked about, the white spaces. But as I mentioned to you from those interference examples, detection of a spectrum hold doesn't necessarily mean absence of spectrum activity. All these non-linearities of transmitters, intermodulation products, and side sensors, whether you are transmitting besides your receiver, etc., these all need to be considered in determining whether the spectrum hold is a real spectrum hold or not. But this is also possible that this could be implemented in the radio regulations. So there are some early simulation results, and Finan has spoken about this. He gave this these curves for high density, but these are the same curves for medium density. And it's encouraging to see that a substantial number of cognitive radios, the mean, if you take the CDF of 0.5, a substantial number of cognitive radios could be sustained for the different types of propagation environment and the interference central and decentral schemes. He's already explained that, so I don't need to dwell on this. But this is positive to see that a reasonably attractive number of cognitive radios can be sustained if the primary is able to withstand a small degradation in its SNR.